Hey everyone, Ryan here and welcome to another episode of BGP Game Dev. In this video I'll be talking about how to become a console developer for the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, and as an included bonus, the Atari VCS. Now this is all based on my experience being an indie developer here in the United States of America, but I'm sure it's a similar process in other countries as well, and this is accurate as of 2024 and may change in the future. So aside from Steam, Epic Games, GOG, itch.io, and other PC platforms to release on, the standalone game console has always been the staple of home gaming for the ease of accessibility and use. Unlike having to set up and build a computer with parts or worrying about what kind of specs your computer or laptop has to play games, the consoles have always been a more universal and affordable way of playing your favorite games ever since the dawn of gaming. Well, somewhat affordable. So in this video I'm going to go over on how to apply for the consoles and my personal experiences porting to them all as a game maker developer, and just note the majority of the console development process is under NDAs, aka non-disclosure agreements, so I can't really give any tips on how to port to the consoles as it's different for every engine and every game. And first of all, we're going to go over the cons of console development, which is best to get out of the way. So the first con is the high barrier to entry. So console development requires you to apply for each of the individual developer portals and write a detailed pitch for your game. When you apply, along with many other requirements you need to fill out in the application forms, and there's always a gigantic chance that you'll be rejected from any of these consoles. For example, I made it into PlayStation, Xbox, and the Atari VCS on my first try, but I was rejected by Nintendo 5 times before I got in with my 6th attempt. And I've also spoken to other developers who were rejected by PlayStation and Xbox a few times, and some got onto Nintendo on their first attempt but got rejected from PlayStation and Xbox, so your mileage may vary. And the reason why the consoles have such a high barrier to entry is to keep out non-serious hobbyists and to prevent shovelware from flooding their stores, which doesn't always work. And the console companies want to make sure that you're a good business partner who can actually release games and make them money. I know shovelware and low quality games have plagued the gaming industry since the dawn of gaming, but sadly they're here to stay. But that doesn't mean we can't release our own games to combat the ever-growing list of shovelware coming out on all storefronts. And number 2 is the varying difficulty of porting to each platform. So each of the consoles has their own varying hardware and specs that may or may not work properly for your game. For example, the Nintendo Switch is a much weaker console than the PlayStation 4 and 5 and Xbox Series consoles, and sometimes consoles won't play nice with the code that you've written for the PC. So when I started porting Popcorn Rocket to the PS5 as my first console, I couldn't get it to work for months due to a PC plugin I used to make PS5 controllers work for my games. So the irony was I was using a PS5 controller plugin for the PC that was making the game not work on the actual PS5 hardware. But once I got that solved, I was able to get the PS5 port of Popcorn Rocket done. And as for the Nintendo Switch port for Popcorn Rocket, my yellow kernel explosions lagged on the Switch and not on any of the other consoles, so I had to remove the particle effects I used for the explosions to make my game run properly on the Nintendo Switch, and because of this I'm probably not going to be using particles for any of my future games. And each of the consoles handles save games differently than the PC depending on the engine you use, so I had to completely rewrite my save system for Popcorn Rocket on the consoles, and the good news is that I'm able to use this console save system on the PC too, so all of my future games will be able to interchange the save code. However, for Popcorn Rocket on the Nintendo Switch, some of the save points were not working properly, while they worked fine on the other platforms, so I had to write specific code for the Nintendo Switch in order to get the save points working properly, which was a pain. So number 3 is the unpredictable time that it will take to port your game. Because the consoles have different requirements and hardware, you need to set up adequate time to port to each one. People on the Game Dev Reddit say at least accommodate a month or more for each console port, and not just the actual porting process, but setting up the store pages, the trailers, release date coordination, and trying to pass certification, which is the process that the console companies use to test your game if it works properly, and if you're following the guidelines for terminology. For example, you can't just say press start on the consoles, you need to say press plus for the Nintendo Switch, press menu for Xbox, and press options for PlayStation. And terminology is a massive thing the console companies look for when testing your game. It took me about 4 times to pass certification for the PlayStation 4 and 5, 3 times for the Xbox, and about 6 times for the Nintendo Switch, so porting to each of these consoles was around 1 to 2 months. And the Atari VCS took longer due to issues on both games Game Maker and Atari side, and literally took around 6 months to finally get the Atari VCS and the Game Maker updates to not cause conflicts with each other. So if you're on kind of a deadline, you'll want to allocate enough time for console porting, which I would recommend a month or two or possibly more to fix problems, adjust your game, and going back with the console companies with questions and for the certification process. So now I'll talk about the advantages of the consoles. So number one is the less oversaturated storefronts. So around 30 to 40 games come out per day on average on Steam, which can lead to far less visibility on the Steam store, and the consoles only release around 15 to 20 games per week, which is far less saturated. But saturation does occur on the console storefronts, just like the trophy stuffing games on the PlayStation, where you play a game for 5 minutes and you immediately get all the trophies, which is causing a lot of discourse among the PlayStation trophy community with these really cheap trophy stuffing games. And the Nintendo eShop is flooded with shovelware and low effort games for a quick buck like calculator and hentai games. It's a lot less of a problem on the Xbox, but most Xbox gamers play on Game Pass, so a lot of the Xbox shovelware is barely seen at all. And what I do like about the Atari VCS is that it's a very small niche console and the store is barely oversaturated, and you can easily browse the store since a lot of developers don't develop for it. And with the less oversaturated console storefronts, you do have a better chance of being seen naturally. You will still have to promote your game on social media regardless in order to get eyeballs on your games. And number two is more chances at promotion. Now Steam does their yearly summer sale and many other sales throughout the year, but the other yearly sales they have on Steam are geared more towards different types of games like the space sale, the FPS sale, the horror game sale, etc. And if you don't have a game that fits those specific types of sales, you can't participate. So the PlayStation and Xbox stores, the Nintendo eShop, and recently the Atari VCS store do run sales promotions from time to time, and I have to admit a ton of my sales, especially on the PlayStation consoles, have been from these promotions. Now you can't join these promotions all the time and you do need to space them out, but the consoles do give a lot of promotions along with having less oversaturated stores. Also, if you're very lucky, you may get promoted by some of the bigger reps and accounts from the consoles on social media. For example, you can get your Nintendo Switch game promoted by their Indie World account or even be part of their showcase. And back in January 2024, Popcorn Rocket was promoted by Sarah Bond, and who's Phil Spencer's boss, which led to my first 4-figure week of sales and is still continuing to give me money to this day on Xbox. Now I can't give out details on how to get promoted or even be on these showcases due to NDAs, but you do get these opportunities when you release on consoles, and hopefully you can get lucky to get promoted, but there are no guarantees. So now with the pros and cons out of the way, let us begin on how to apply for the consoles and my experiences. So first of all, you need to work in a game engine that offers console exports like Unity, Unreal, Godot, and Game Maker, and more. And I know Godot is rising as a popular game engine due to it being free and open source, but Godot only has native Nintendo Switch export right now, and you need to have third-party programs to export Godot games to other consoles like the Xbox and PlayStation. And console porting from these engines does cost a bit of money, and for example, at the time of this video in 2024, I'm paying about $79.99 a month for Game Maker's console export. I think a Unity Pro license for console export is about $185 a month, and Unreal is free until you make over $1 million, but Unreal has a steeper learning curve. And I know there's other ways to port from other engines like RPG Maker and others, but those require a ton of workarounds and third-party programs, so console porting ain't cheap, yo. So let's begin on how to apply for each of the consoles. I'll begin in the order I applied for all of them, and I will provide links below to the various console developer portal application sites. And before you apply, I would recommend you have the following: a Steam page or a web page with a trailer of your game showing the best parts of your gameplay, a domain for your company or game, with a business email with your domain URL. You will not be taken seriously if you use your Gmail or free email account, a registered business with an EIN, aka an employer identification number, a short game design document around 2 to 5 pages, a press kit, and a general pitch on what your game is about, the features, and what makes it stand out. And you can go to popcornrocket.com, which I will link in the description below, to see how I did my press kit and overall webpage setup. I used this URL for all my applications, and it helped me get into all the platforms. And you definitely need to approach each of the consoles like you're applying for a job interview, so try to sound as professional as you can. So when I applied for these consoles back in the spring of 2023. Popcorn Rocket was about 75% completed, and I had a full Steam page, trailer, website, and press kit ready to go. So the first one I did was for the Sony PlayStation, and Sony requires that you have an actual registered business with an EIN, aka an employer identification number in the USA, and I assume you'll need an equivalent for other countries, and also a static IP address. I created my LLC, aka Limited Liability Company, which is known as Battle Geek Plus LLC, back in January of 2023 for about $350+, and I have to pay a $70 registration fee every year to keep it up. I got a static IP from my ISP, aka my internet service provider, for about $10 a month, and I'm sure there's other resources on Google on how to get a static IP if you don't want to go through an ISP. So after I applied for Sony, I got a response within 3 days saying I was approved, and I was able to get my credentials for the Sony developer portal, and I got the dev kits within 2 to 3 weeks. So Sony does give you 2 free dev kits of their latest console, so I got 2 PlayStation 5 dev kits. So if you want to develop for the PlayStation 4, you will have to pay for a PS4 dev kit. I can't disclose how much it is due to NDAs, but luckily the one I got wasn't too expensive, and definitely way cheaper than a PS5 Pro. And overall, Sony is the most friendly towards indie developers, and their application process was pretty easy to get through as long as I had a registered business and a static IP. And I know the business and static IP requirements may make developers shy away from Sony, but they are mandatory, and they will show Sony that you're serious business. So in Battle Geek Plus LLC, the LLC stands for Looking Legit, Captain. So for the Xbox, you will need to apply at ID at Xbox, which I will provide in the link in the description below. And as for Xbox, they're a lot more strict on accepting developers, since they were the first back in the Xbox 360 days to really embrace indie devs, thanks to games like Braid, Super Meat Boy, Castle Crashers, and more. And you will need a solid pitch along with at least a minute and a half of gameplay footage along with your trailer to show Xbox, since they are more strict about gaming concepts and ideas in order to be accepted. It took me about 1 week to get a reply from Xbox saying I got accepted, and about 6 months of back and forth correspondence to get the dev kits and access to the developer portal. Since Xbox takes a lot of time to approve developers, they do give you 2 free Xbox One dev kits, which I recommend more than the Xbox Series, since if your game works on the Xbox One, it will work on the Xbox Series S and X. And you also can apply for Xbox Game Pass, and I'll provide a link down below too. But however, it's very difficult to get accepted on Game Pass, since only around 300-ish games are there on any given time, and I got rejected when I applied for Popcorn Rocket, but Xbox was pretty nice about it and encouraged me to reapply again in the future. It's already difficult enough to get on Xbox in the first place, so getting on Game Pass is more of the icing on the cake, but I'm just glad to be part of Xbox in general. Alright, and next up is the big one, Nintendo. And I will post a link to their developer portal application in a link in the description below. And among game developer circles, you're gonna hear a lot of stories about game developers constantly being rejected by Nintendo. From what I heard back in the Wii and the DSiWare days, you needed to have legitimate and confirmed office space, mostly so the Wii and DSi dev kits wouldn't get stolen, and it was tough to get your game on these consoles back then since there were file size limits, and most indie devs back in those days didn't even have registered businesses, let alone actual office space. So the Wii and Nintendo DSiWare days were a no-go to a lot of indie devs. And after Xbox and PlayStation were making bank with indies in the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 and Vita days, Nintendo let everyone on board with the Wii U and the 3DS. And I remember applying to be a Nintendo developer back in 2018 when I was contemplating on coming back to game dev, but I wasn't really serious about it, and the Wii U and 3DS dev kits were pretty unaffordable, especially with the salary I was earning back in 2018. And it's kind of backfired on Nintendo because the Wii U and the 3DS stores were filled with shovelware, but I admit I didn't play my Wii U enough to even notice the shovelware, and while I thought the Wii U was a great console, let's face it, it didn't have the game library to compete with the PS4. And after letting everyone in with the Wii U and the 3DS, Nintendo was far more strict on what got in on the Switch, and I've spoken to developers who've been rejected every single time they've applied for the duration of the Switch's lifespan, and some devs I've spoken to were rejected 5 times, some 10 times, some 20 times, and so on. I got rejected 5 times and I made it in on my 6th try. So the first time I got rejected in the spring of 2023, I forgot to include my press kit and kind of filled out their application in haste. So the second time I got rejected was in the summer of 2023. So Popcorn Rocket was completed on the PC and was waiting for release, and I sent in another application with more details details, a link to my press kit, and still got rejected. So the third time was in the fall of 2023. I had just launched Popcorn Rocket on Steam and the PS5, so I at least had 2 release platforms under my belt, and I added in more details in my application and got rejected again. So the fourth time was in late January 2024 after my Xbox release. I added in more details along with my Xbox store page and got rejected again. So the fifth time was in the summer of 2024 after I released on the PlayStation 4. I added in even more details along with updated sales numbers, the tweet from Xbox President Sarah Bond that promoted the game, and I was hoping this was going to be a surefire success, and rejected again. Mamma mia! I was honestly about to give up at this point, but I decided to reapply again after my Atari VCS release, and I added the Atari VCS to the list of platforms I released on and more information and sale numbers, and behold, on my 6th time, Nintendo finally gave me keys to the Mushroom Kingdom. Woohoo! Maybe it was actually mentioning the Atari VCS that got me in, but I do know a few Atari VCS developers who still have not gotten in on the Nintendo Switch yet, so I don't think that was the case, but it's kind of a coincidence after my Atari VCS release, so maybe some people at Nintendo have a soft spot for Atari. Well, either way, I'm not complaining. Now, sadly, you don't get any free dev kits from Nintendo, so you will have to pay for a Switch dev kit, and I can't disclose the price because of the NDAs, but it's definitely way cheaper than a PS5 Pro. So there's been a ton of speculation on how the application process works for the Nintendo Switch. Some people on the game dev Reddit got in on the first try, some had to apply 2 to 3 times to get in, some people had to meet Nintendo indie representatives at conventions and trade shows like PAX, GDC, etc. Some got in through a personal connection with Nintendo reps, and it personally took me 6 times to get in, so maybe I was lucky because of the Atari VCS. Well, who knows, but like I said before, I'm definitely not complaining. And now, last but not least, how to apply for the Atari VCS. So after my 4th rejection from Nintendo in January 2024, I was a bit depressed, and the stars kind of magically aligned as I stumbled upon this Atari VCS video by my good pal Eli from Treefall Studios, and you can check out his video in this card and in the description below, along with his game tilting tiles, which I highly recommend. So at the time of this video, Atari doesn't have a developer sign-up page like the rest of the platforms, so you will have to go into their Atari VCS Discord, which I will link in the description below, and once you're in the Discord, you'll want to contact David Page, aka Davpaw, who's part of Atari's business development, and send him an email, and you can ask in the Discord for his email address. And I'm in the Atari VCS Discord too as Ryan BGP, and you will have to have an actual voice chat via Google Meetings with Dave and speak to him about your game and pitch it to him. He is a pretty cool guy to talk to, but make sure you approach it like a job interview and make sure you have your game sound like it's a good fit for Atari. And Atari is not really a console where you're going to put hobby or beta projects. They really do want fully complete games or games nearing completion, so I would recommend waiting until you at least finish your game and release it on Steam and other consoles and then apply for Atari. So once you get approved, you will have to sign some paperwork for Atari, and Atari will send you a free VCS console, which can be flashed into a dev console or a normal console, and you should be on your way. So now, how hard it is to develop and port for each console. Now, many of my other game dev friends will probably disagree with me since their experiences were different, but as a game maker developer, here are my rankings from easiest to hardest. So easiest is the Xbox, then the PlayStation 4 and 5, then the Atari VCS, and then the Nintendo Switch. However, if you're a Unity developer, the Atari VCS will probably be the easiest since you can export a native Linux build that will work on the Atari VCS operating system, which is Debian. And Xbox, in my opinion, is the most straightforward and requires the least amount of work to get the dev kits working. For PlayStation, I feel that every 1 step it takes to do on Xbox, PlayStation takes 3 steps to do. And the Atari VCS was incredibly difficult for me at first since native Game Maker controls don't work right away, and I had to use the Input Candy plugin from Lost Astronaut to get my controls to work. And during the time from February 2024 to July 2024, both Atari and Game Maker's updates did not play well with each other, resulting in my controls not working until both of their runtimes were updated in the summer. So in June of 2024, the Atari VCS build kept freezing at random points until Game Maker finally updated their runtime before July 2024, and that finally stabilized everything. And I heard that Atari is going to implement Proton into the VCS, which which is what the Steam Deck uses to play Windows games since the Steam Deck uses Linux, and that will make overall development for Game Maker devs on the Atari VCS a million times easier now that Game Maker controls will finally just work out of the box. As for the Nintendo Switch, if you thought getting approved as a developer was the hard part, just wait until you actually port your game to it. The Switch is very underpowered compared to a lot of the other platforms, including the Atari VCS, and like I mentioned before, I had to remove all of my yellow particle explosions from the Nintendo Switch port of Popcorn Rocket to make it run smoother, and it has a bit more loading time compared to all the other platforms. Otherwise, it does play as smooth as the rest of the other consoles, and you also do need to take into account all of the playable configurations with the Nintendo Switch, such as handheld mode, docked mode, and tabletop mode, along with the Joy-Cons and the Pro Controller. You gotta make sure your game is working with every single possible Joy-Con and controller configuration, which was really difficult for me at first, but I was able to get everything working eventually, but it was still painful. Also, a lot of my save points were not working properly on the Switch when they worked fine on the other consoles, so I had to add more save code to certain sections of Popcorn Rocket for the Switch port just to make sure the saves worked and didn't self-delete, which was super painful and cost me a lot of development time. Fixing the controller setups for the Nintendo Switch was a lot like playing whack-a-mole, since there was a time I would get docked mode working but not tabletop and vice versa, and I swear man, if you can get accepted by Nintendo in the first place and release a game on the Switch with all of the controller and Joy-Con setups along with your game saves working and not self-deleting, you are a war hero, my friend. You are part of the Mushroom Kingdom, fighting alongside with Mario. So when the Atari VCS implements Proton and makes native Game Maker controller code work by default, I'll probably re-rank them as Atari VCS as the easiest, and Xbox and PlayStation, and Nintendo Switch still being the hardest to port and develop for. And as for navigating the developer portals, I'll say Atari VCS is the easiest by far, then Xbox, then Nintendo, then PlayStation being the hardest. Now I can't show any of the developer portals due to NDAs, but I do remember one person on the Game Dev Reddit saying it was super overwhelmed by the PlayStation developer portal, and I also remember being super overwhelmed too at first, and still at times I'm a little overwhelmed, but I can definitely navigate it better nowadays. So my advice when you're finally an approved developer for any of the consoles, don't get too overwhelmed by the developer portals and the porting process. So take your time and really study the documentation, since all the portals have really extensive documentation for the consoles. And if you're a Unity dev, Unity hands down has the best documentations for all the consoles in their help files. Game Maker's documentation is decent, but I still have to figure out a lot of things for myself. I don't know how Unreal's documentation is, but if you're a Unity dev, you'll probably have far better documentation for console porting than most of the other engines. And if you can navigate through Steam's really complicated backend, and especially Epic Games, you can definitely port to the consoles. I mean, if I can do it on my own, you can do it too, and I'm as dumb as a rock. I mean, I failed my C++ and Java courses back in college, but you know what? I'm here today making games. And also, there's just that surreal feeling of actually playing your game on an actual console than the PC, since most of us grew up playing consoles, and actually playing your own game on them is just... Because man, I still remember very vividly when I finally got Popcorn Rocket working on actual PS5 hardware for the first time. You know, seeing my title screen booming on there with the TV rather than my monitor, and using a PlayStation controller was such an indescribable feeling, along with having the game play on the Xbox, handheld on the Nintendo Switch, and then playing it on the Atari VCS. However, you will get sick of playing your own game over and over again to fix bugs and glitches no matter what the platform, and it's no different on the consoles. And as for making physical games, well, that's a topic for another video, and I'm going through that process right now. So wow, that was a pretty long video about the console development process, and I hope I was able to help you guys understand the process a little more and how to become a developer for each of the consoles. I've honestly been making the majority of my sales from the consoles in the 5 figures as opposed to the PC, and I highly recommend the consoles if you have a game that's fit for them, and I think they're definitely worth the effort releasing your game on them. So with that said, this ends another episode of BGP Game Dev. This is Ryan signing out, and later gamers. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to check out these other videos, and also make sure to follow me on social media and check out the official Battle Geek Plus website. Take care.